Good morning, Bitcoiners. Morning. Lots of funny news today. I checked, the sun is up. We're enjoying our sunrises, of course, right? We like to show every sunrise on this morning. You know, they say it's real healthy to check sunrises and sunsets, right? So we try to bring the health of the sunrise into the show. Morning, everyone. Morning, Rikshan. Morning, Dex. Hope everyone's good. We have so much funny news this morning. But first, sun is up. I checked. Bitcoin's running. Let's have our coffee. Talk about the news. Perfect coffee. We love coffee. You can drink whatever you want. We don't care, right? If it's night where you are, drink alcohol if you feel like it, right? If it helps, right? If that's what you're into, go for it. This is a non-judgmental show. We're here to have some laughs, and there's some funny stuff today. You know, with elections coming in America, the clown world histrionics are bigger than ever. People are losing it. The PSYOP machines are just overheating right now, right? There's so much spin, so much pressure, so much conjecture, anger, yelling, screaming, trying to persuade. There was one of the funniest ones I've ever seen in my life yesterday. This guy on MSNBC, Michael Becklos, came on the show. And, you know, I get it. People are stressed out. But first of all, he's in, like, you got to see the video to even get it. He's a normie journalist who I guess is still doing the Zoom thing, right? I did a lot of mainstream media before COVID, and it was fun because I didn't take the mainstream media seriously. I was just doing Bitcoin stories, and it was always the same story: number up, number down, hack, right? So I knew what I was doing. It was an adversarial environment. I generally knew how to think on my feet. Even if I was on live TV, like Squawk Box or whatever, I could understand what they were doing and pivot and move. And I knew what the game was and what the score was. So I was pretty good at it, right? I was pretty good at it. But I didn't do it because you got anything from it. Like, it didn't give Twitter followers or any credibility in the Bitcoin world, or it was none of those things, right? I didn't do it because Bitcoiners were like, oh, you were on Squawk Box. I never even posted one of the videos online. They were so pathetic because the questions were stupid. And, you know, you're trying to explain elementary Bitcoin to people who don't really want to understand, right? They're there to try to dunk on you. But I did it because they used to give you a black car service, and I loved the black car service. You drive around New York City, and, you know, you could drop people off, and you could take friends with you because you just had the car for hours, right? They'd pick you up at your house, and then, you know, I'd sort of go and run around town with the black cars after. And I used to get it about every week, right? And I'd say, can you go this way? I want to take Brooklyn Bridge. Can you drop my friend off downtown? Can you, you know, blah, 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 blah. We had a lot of fun with them. When COVID started, they stopped sending the black cars. So I was like, no, there's no point. Like, am I going to get on Zoom and then go on CNBC? Forget it. But this Michael Becklos guy did it, right? Now, first of all, I guess he's been doing it for years and still doesn't realize that you got to get the camera angle like straight on. So he's got the, you know, looking up at the camera like this situation, right? And he's like, so he's there screaming upwards at a camera, right, on CNBC, just poorly positioned. And, you know, his eyebrows are up and he's trying to get the level of intensity up. So this is what he says: America is 6 days away from the end of democracy, historians, and the rule of law. 6 days away from the end of democracy, historians, and the rule of law. Okay. And the start of a brutal GOP dictatorship in which our children could be arrested and conceivably killed. He's going up there. The kids could be killed if you don't vote. Right? And I mean, if you're not into watching mainstream media for the laughs, you might not find that funny, right? But I am into it for the laughs. Normal comedy is not funny. They're not allowed to be funny. The funniest thing you can do now is just put these folks out there and let them be themselves, especially around an election, right? This stuff is all over the place, right? People are freaking out. There's an even funnier race going on because, so we saw the Democrat approach now seems to be this democracy is in threat, right? So the Republicans are going with economy. You got many problems, physical security, a little too much on the physical security, I will say, right? I don't really watch Fox, but I've been seeing a lot of Now, I'm not trying, I don't live in New York City anymore because I find it dangerous, right? I stay out of cities in general at the moment, right? I go in and I'm out, and I'm happy for the next few years living in the countryside. I made a promise to myself today. I'll go back to New York. I'll move back to New York when the following two things happen. We can take airships again for great distances around the city, like Zeppelins, and the skyscrapers can be put back to their original use. Those dang skyscrapers were supposed to be airship stations, tethering stations. You were supposed to moor Zeppelins on the top of the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, and the docking facilities are all still there. They're all still there. So I'll go back to New York City when I can be in, let's say, Long Island, that I can get on a big airship and just float over all the traffic and misery and then dock on the Empire State Building. I don't care which skyscraper. I don't care. Get me on a skyscraper and then I'll come down and we'll be great, right? So that's A, right? Exhibit A of when I move back to New York City. And I think it's inevitable. I do think it's inevitable. I think that air transport around major cities is one way through gridlock. The infrastructure is basically zero, right? You don't have to tunnel. You don't have to you don't have to build a new road or any of those things. So airships, the future, especially for suburban travel. I'm not saying I'm not taking the airship back to Vermont, right? I'm not doing that. By the way, one good thing that happened in New York City, the new LaGuardia Airport, amazing. Flying cars are coming, Justin. They're already there. The Japanese have built one. Go look at it. It looks like it's got 4 of the drone fans on top of what looks more or less like a motorbike cockpit, or a skidoo or sea-doo or jet ski or whatever pilot seat and handlebar. So you get your handlebar and seat, and then you got the 4 things around you, and it looks intuitive. I saw the videos. The flying cars, I think, are here, right? I think we are in the flying car era. So, I mean, there'll be all kinds of stuff, right? I just think the airships are the easiest short-term, no traffic considerations. It's gonna be great. The other one that I want, I guess somewhat related to that bike that I just mentioned, is about, and I predict this is going to happen, about a third of New York City is going to be e-bikes, electric vehicles. Yeah, there you go. We need to get the electric cars out first before we hit flying. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be electric cars like we all thought, right? I mean, like the Teslas. I can see those being popular and continuing. But a few years ago, there was a report from Morgan Stanley in 2020, and I cite it a lot, and I'll cite it again on the show, where they mention the configuration of electric vehicles versus normal cars. And there's something like a tenth of the parts. It goes from being like 15,000 critical actionable pieces to make a vehicle to something like 400 or 500, right? Because obviously a combustion engine has all kinds of bells and whistles to get that combustion to go, right? You've got to have pressure valves, and you got a coolant system, hydraulic system, all kinds of stuff going on. The gas, the chambers, everything. Electric is just a battery, and it pumps everything into the drivetrain, right? So right away, you've eliminated a bunch of critical parts that go wrong all the time, hoses and plugs and spark, none of that's there. So it's battery, direct energy into the system, you go. So the number of parts required to make a car in the future, if it's electric, are far fewer. Now, go one step further and look at what's going on in Shanghai. I had this idea when I was in Shanghai in 2016 already, in 2016. And you saw the number of the electric bikes in town. And the reason why is they had already banned the 2-stroke engine because of smog. And there's no scooters. Like, it's the thing I can't stand about being in most Asian cities. Seoul doesn't have it. Japan doesn't have it. Singapore doesn't have it. But if you go to Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia or Vietnam, or great places, love visiting them. My only complaint is when I'm in the city, it's nothing but the smell of 2-stroke engines burning gas, and the chaos and the noise of the scooters everywhere, right? Like, it's so irritating. If you've been in one of those cities for a little too long, like a week or two, and then you end up in Singapore, people criticize Singapore for kind of being boring and whatever, but finally peace and quiet. Like it's just not the two-stroke engine. So when I went to Shanghai, I was really surprised by all of these electric vehicles, right? The bikes, there'd be like 100 at every red light or every stop sign, mixed in, not really their own lanes or roads or anything, but they had to ban the gas ones because of the smog, so it was already all electric. And you know, I'll get to that in a second. The LV99 Slacker, love my e-back, not going back to regular bicycle. I'll get to that in a second. So so the whole city had these things, and I said, well, you know, that's pretty great because it's not noisy and you can fit more people in. Now, it was typical chaos of a big city like Shanghai and no rules, and this all happened naturally and organically. Other than the prohibition on two-stroke engines, it just flipped over to be all these electric ones. But here's what I think. New York City is going to dedicate 1/3, I think a third, of all streets in the 5 boroughs, maybe not Staten Island, but in the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, about 1/3 of streets are going to go to just the delivery bikes, the delivery cars, the e-bikes, right? Just e-bikes, no cars allowed, not a bike lane. We're not talking about bike lanes here. We're not driving next to the big cars. It's their own streets. There'll be major north-south, uptown, midtown, downtown avenues, e-bike highways, let's say. I think they're going to give a bridge, either Brooklyn or Williamsburg. So these are 2 major bridges in New York City with a lot of traffic that goes across them. Brooklyn a little less because it's the original bridge in the world of that size and scale and all that stuff. It invented our modern bridge technology, right? And invented other things. Did you know that like all diving underwater technology comes from the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge? They didn't even know about the bends until they built the Brooklyn Bridge. The builder got the bends. He had to watch the whole 30-year construction of the Brooklyn Bridge from a room not far from when they were building because he couldn't stand and walk anymore. If you don't know what the bends are, if you go underwater and the pressure isn't right, you can get these like bubbles in your brain, I guess, and you're screwed after that. So caisson technology, which is like the air bubbles they drop underwater so you can dig and build stuff, right? That was invented for the Brooklyn Bridge. No one knew how to do that before. That was invented there. Will New York ever be BTC friendly? I want to leave. Yeah, we'll talk about New York being BTC friendly in a moment, definitely, because big stuff happening there. Oh, and if you are interested in following the US elections, yeah, Radiohead album, The Bends, exactly. The Bends talks about the medical breakthrough they discovered at the Brooklyn Bridge when they dove under, right? That's the Bends. And the whole like pressure suit and all that stuff, Brooklyn Bridge. You know, we didn't know that. It was the highest building in the world at the time, right? When they built the towers, you can hardly see them in the skyline in New York City now, but they were the highest towers ever built when they were built, right? They were amazing. And it remains one of the most incredible monuments of a civilization. That period in America when they had built their great monument, this to the Americans at the time was the Great Monument. It was this great public infrastructure work, and for the first time ever, it was just built for average people to walk over water. They were above the clouds. They were above birds. That had never happened, right? That average people could go for a walk and the birds would be below them, right? That was brand new. No one ever knew about it. People would come just to cross that bridge, right? That, you know, I love that bridge. That's why I had it, you know, on the show. I had a hotel near it. I love the bridge, right? So if you go back a few episodes, like 2 weeks ago, you'll have the Brooklyn Bridge as our view, right? We love it. Where was I? New York. We're Bitcoin Magazine next Tuesday night for the midterms in the United States is going to be hosting an election watch party, and I'll be one of the hosts. So come on, it's going to be fun. We're of course there morning audio morning. We're rooting for Bitcoin, right? So we're going to go back with the illusion that I made the other day that, you know, because Bitcoiners have the high ground on so many political issues, what we're going to do is we're going to stand and we're going to piss into the red wave as it comes. And we're going to talk about the orange tide, you know, a little bit of yellow piss, a little bit of red wave, and you get an orange tide. So we're going to cover all the Bitcoin related stories as the election results come in. And New York State is a major one because New York City can't actually do anything about Bitcoin and crypto and all that stuff. It's all an Albany issue. New York City is not the capital of New York State. A lot of people don't know that. New York City is just a city, which is how it was so great. Hamilton fought hard for New York to have no government involvement, like no federal government, no state involvement, and to be an independent city. So we don't have these leeches that live in the city to the same extent that DC does, or Paris does, or London does, or other major cities. They made it, and that was Hamilton's doing, to make it a pure commerce city, and therefore not politically in the bag. And so everything around Bitcoin and crypto actually relates to the town of Albany. And Albany is up for grabs in this election, right? There is a fellow from, the bit license needs to be dismantled first. So that's what I mean, Justin. That's what I mean. The bit license is actually an Albany thing, nothing to do with New York City. And because I've been lobbying against the bit license from day one. I brought a delegation from Canada down to meet Ben Losky when he was doing it in 2014. And we told him in 2014, what are you talking about? Like, you don't know what you're doing. How can you regulate it like this? This is crazy. Because if you remember, the original bit license had a bunch of consultations. And so we just participated, and it didn't go very well. He didn't listen to us. I invited him to like a million things over the years, Ben Losky, but he won't go in public and speak about the damage he's done. He's not interested. I booked him for a show years ago, and he was so boring that I'll never let him speak alone again. So that's why he won't do it, because I want to, obviously create some interaction, right? We don't want to watch Ben Losky sparring. We want to watch Ben Losky in a fight, right? He's the guy who created the bit license. So the election coverage on Tuesday, we're going to be covering everything related to Bitcoin and all the different races that are relevant. So Arizona would be one. Blake Masters is in a tight race for the Senate. He's a big Bitcoiner. There's a few of these situations around. It looks like Miami-Dade might switch as well, and that has implications for our beloved mayor of Miami and what they're doing for Bitcoin down there. So there's a few of these races all around. We're going to cover them. It's going to be a good show. Come, enjoy. It'll be fun. But here's the funny one. So the Democrats are pitching this like concept of like democracy in a couple of years, and we don't know, and da-da-da-da. Whereas the Republicans are definitely leaning into the economy, and they're generally regarded as the party that is making economic choices first. And so this is not to say one is great and the other, they're both shitty, obviously. We don't have to say that every time, but one is a little better in this case. So, or at least aligned with most Americans' troubles. And I don't mind Suarez, but he made a major mistake. Yeah, he did with Miami Coin. He did. But still, right, we got to give people chances to make mistakes. Everyone's made that mistake in this industry. When they first get in, they say Bitcoin and everything, right? So you got to give everyone a chance to make the same mistake. He is a class of 2020 fella, right? So give him one bear, right? Give him one bear. I give everybody a bear, right? I'm on bear number 3, right? So for me personally, like I entered in a bear, while the 2013 as it was sort of peaking, but I saw that first bear, and at the time no one was thinking Bitcoin only, and well, a little bit it was around. I knew a lot of the original block streamers and some of the Bitcoin core folks at that time, and they were already back then in 2015 very much only Bitcoin, but I didn't, my technical understanding of everything was not as high back then. And anyway, the point is, you got to give everyone a bear at least to understand and come to the realization. That's what I do, right? I give everyone the benefit of a bear. So here's the funny part. You've got this race going on down in Kansas, and it's Kansas, I think Trump won by like 15 points, but the governor is a Democrat, right? So the governor, and this is a good thing. I love it when this happens in the United States, when you've got some, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. Yeah, I voted Republican for the first time in the midterm election in Texas. Yeah, early voting. Yeah, that's, Bitcoin reveals all incentives. That was the point of the show yesterday, right? So LV99 Slacker talking about how much Bitcoin has already changed his political perceptions. I think that's pretty common, right? Pretty common. So this Kansas race, right? This Kansas race has a female Democrat, right? Great. We love when states are all mixed up, right? We like when they vote a bit Republican, a bit Democrat, because at least then it keeps the system from being too efficient. The last thing we want is efficient politicians in government and all that stuff. That's the last thing we want, right? We don't mind if they waste time and argue and are inefficient because it allows all of us creatives and entrepreneurs to get on with our lives. So we love gridlock. Gridlock is good, right? We love gridlock. But this woman's got another problem on her hands. So she is a Democrat in a Republican state. And she now, they got all this stuff about democracy that our party is spitting out, democracy's in crisis. But you got this little old lady, right? And she knows if she does the thing that they're doing in DC, it ain't going to work for her in Kansas. So she's got to thread this line of like, I like Trump and I would do Trump stuff, right? But I'm not like him. So if you want to see this lady, every day she's got to pretend that she's a Democrat and is aligned with them, but also that she doesn't hate Trump. It's her only chance of winning. It's her only chance, and she knows it. So watching her every day sitting there trying to make these decisions is pretty funny. And she's getting called out for it now. And so everyone's jumping on her, what do you think about this? But that's the funny thing. You get a bunch of Democrats now jumping on her to be honest about her opinions, but it's only going to lose them the seats. So they're pushing her to lose, which is, come on. Funny. The other one that I found funny was, and we're going to talk about this more, it's the Twitter advertisers, right? So yesterday, the Wall Street Journal tries to make a big story because Pfizer, everyone's favorite company. We love Pfizer, right? Who doesn't love Pfizer? And they're promoting it like it's a loss for Twitter because Pfizer paused its ads on Twitter. When we talked about the past couple of days, there's this quest to attack Twitter advertisers because it's perhaps the only way to give Elon any trouble, right? So yeah, Shell family, Pfizer, so Pfizer. And they're trying to talk about it as if it's a bad thing for Twitter that Pfizer didn't advertise with them. Now, here's the thing you got to know about the mainstream media. And this is all you ever had to know, right? To know about everything that's going on with the pandemic and all that is actually stop watching the news for a second and just watch who pays the bills. Every single advertisement on daytime cable news in America is the pharmaceutical industry. All of them. They're their advertisers. They're the only ones. They're the only ones paying the bills over there. So, and not everyone knows that or has put two and two together, but of course you'll never get sound health information because the whole point of the news stations is to get revenue from the pharmaceutical companies, even if they're not controlling them directly, which I don't think they are. I don't think the pharmaceutical companies have to tell Fox or CNN what to say. They don't have to do that. Just like Bezos doesn't have to tell anyone at WAPO what to say. They don't have to do that. People understand, right? We're going to talk about it, right, in today's board. People understand survival. They don't have to mind read their bosses to know what they want. And in the case of manufactured consent, Justin says. So in the case of mainstream media, there's no way, right? Unless they find another advertiser. I predicted you would only see I was wrong, right? We got to mention predictions when we're wrong. Here's one I got wrong. I predicted you would finally start seeing criticism of the vaccines the moment other alternative therapeutics came online. So once there was like a vaccine pill, remember we heard about a vaccine pill that might have been possible or whatever, a vaccine pill. I thought once there was something else, then they would know from another company, for example, then the media companies would say, oh, I have another advertiser. But in the end, there's only 4 or 5 big advertisers. And because there's only 4 or 5 big pharmaceutical companies, my theory broke down and didn't really work, right? We didn't see the kind of criticism you'd expect. We saw the criticism, but not from them, right? Not from the mainstream media. But nevertheless, Pfizer out, funny. This is not related to the funny stuff, but this is just skill. And I want you to see, we cover the Carrie Lake stuff a lot on the show. And you got to see the skill. You got to see the skill. Because the skill level of something she did yesterday was, she could beat Trump when I see this easily. Actually, easily. They came and tried to, they had the Capitol police officer that everybody knows died of his own issues, and it's often confused because he died during January 6th, and people say, oh, January 6th, and he died because of the rioters, and blah, 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 right? We all know that story. We talk about it a lot here. Well, now the Dems have created an ad with the mother talking about this, her poor dead son, right? So not funny at all, really sad, but for political purposes, they've opened it up because there's a lot of abuse of context in it. And now we're not going to talk about that. We're here to talk about Kari Lake's response. So of course they gave her the, what do you think about this dead mother and about this kid and the dead kid and the mother who's, the dead cop, and then the mother made the video. So this is what Kari Lake did. I'll never criticize that woman, that mother. I'm a mother. I can't imagine her pain. I can't imagine all that stuff, right? So whatever she said, she says it. That's fine. Now, a normal person would have said, oh, like what I just said, right? Oh, but the Capitol thing, it wasn't exactly as the mother said. You can't win that fight. There's no way. But here's what she did. Here's how she won it. Here's how she came out on top, right? Here's how she came out on top. She said, mother, loss, understand, will never say a bad word about her, totally get it, right? Then she pivots it to all the mothers who have lost kids to fentanyl in America. And this fentanyl thing, it's not everywhere, but I can't understand how it's not the biggest story. We're losing more people in America than we lost in Vietnam, in the World Wars. This is bad news. The numbers are astounding. And it's sort of touching everyone in America now. That's why the media not talking about it is becoming more of an issue, because everybody knows someone. Everybody knows someone who's died of these drugs. And we talked about the $53 billion fine for it all yesterday and how it's not even close to enough. The actual cost is $1.5 trillion a year. And this is all that settlement that we saw with CVS and Walmart and all these pharmaceutical companies having to pay the bill for the OxyContin fraud, right? The devastating fraud to our country. So she comes out and says, that's why I have all the time in the world for the mothers who have lost kids to fentanyl. That's what Kari Lake said, right? She diverted the story about gotcha, you don't care about these people, and turned it into a story and an appropriate priority for a place like Arizona. Because now, Kari Lake, I don't know if everyone is aware of this. We predicted yesterday that America would likely be at war with Mexico soon, right, by the spring. There can be bombs and helicopters and against the cartels. Kari Lake, the minute she's elected, is going to declare an invasion on the southern border and mobilize the military. So I'm not, I'm not making up this military. I'm not plucking out of nowhere, right? It's coming. I think it's coming, and I think she's going to win. So that's Kari Lake. All right. So lots going on today. The Twitter folks, it looks like, are having their layoffs. Right, the Twitter folks are getting laid off today. We're going to talk about why that's important. Twitter, with the advertising coming down, with the advertisers getting attacked, all of it reminded me. We did a show recently on something called persuasion, right? Here's persuasion. What persuasion is, you take a privileged moment, right? Sometimes by bots. If anyone's not following, Cernovich is on a story right now about the Roy Moore election in 2019, 2020. I think it was the midterms the last time around. Democrat, Republican, obviously. The Republican lost, but one of the biggest stories were, and if you remember, the collusion, the 2018, not 2020, 2018 midterms. Russia collusion, Mueller, right, all those stories. At the time, and we found out after, he was criticized because Russian bots followed the campaign, right? Russian bots started to follow the campaign, and this was in the context of the Mueller thing and da-da-da-da. Well, it turns out that, and we found out in real time almost, that those bots were actually just Dem purchases. They bought these bots, right? The bots were bought. And it never really percolated as a story, right? But what we had here was bots creating this privileged moment, right? Then you get a focused illusion. In this case, it was Russia collusion again in a small race, Russia interference in our elections again, right? And then you have the assumed causality, right? That his numbers are up because the Russians have helped, right? And then You don't want the Russians to help, so stop it, right? And then you get what we call cognitive closure. This is called persuasion, not persuasion, persuasion. And it was invented by a guy named Bob Cialdini, who we talk about a lot here. Bob Cialdini is known as the most effective persuader in the modern world, right? He has written books on persuasion, books on what amounts to hypnotism, and on modern propaganda. He is the most effective, scientifically understood propagandist in the world, and shows his work, so you can go and see it, right? You can read his books. He's a real person, and he shared a lot of this information with all of us, so that's why I'm bringing it to you. So this is how it works, right? This is the way of persuasion, to get someone to believe something before it even happens and to direct them into the place where you want them to be. And this actually was learned by Hollywood not long ago. Hollywood adopted this model, and I'll explain. This is from Dr. Thala Siren, right? A doctor. And she's talking about fan baiting. Fan baiting, and I'll read to you what she says. Fan baiting is a form of marketing used by producers, film studios, and actors with the intent of exciting artificial controversy, garnering publicity, and explaining away the negative reviews of a new and highly anticipated production. Fan baiting emerged as a marketing strategy in 2016-2017 after fans of beloved franchises such as the Ghostbusters and Star Wars objected to what they saw as poor writing choices, sloppy scripts, and cheap alterations to plot lines and characters for the sake of shock value. Alongside these critics, there was a small group of bigoted but vociferous commentators who objected to the inclusion of Black and female actors in roles traditionally held by white male actors. So that would be in Star Wars, we saw Rey take the position of Luke, right? And there's sort of goes on in a lot of these stories, right? Black and female roles traditionally held by white male actors. Some of these individuals began publicly harassing actors, right? So it did happen, right? We don't want to deny we are 100% against bigotry in all of its forms, right? So we are against the people who did this, but you've got to give context. A small group, and they really did do these things. Bigots have always attacked diversity on screen, but in a highly polarized political climate, instances of harassment have garnered disproportionately massive media coverage, which provided production studios with both free publicity and a new defense against actual critics. Studios seized the opportunity to discredit criticism of poor writing and acting, insinuating that these too were motivated by bigotry. What used to be accepted as standard critiques were increasingly dismissed as part of ignorant commentary of a toxic fandom. Toxic fandom. Remember those words. I know other people called toxic, right? I know others. The toxic fandom. Soon it became standard practice before release to issue announcements specifying diverse casting choices, coupled with preemptive declarations of solidarity with the cast, whom they now counted on to receive disparaging and harassing comments. Actors who are women and or BIPOC became props and shields for craven corporate laziness and opportunism. The studios save money both by avoiding expensive veteran writers, as well as by offloading publicity to news outlets and social media covering the artificial controversy. Fan baiting works. It brings in a new sympathetic audience whose endorsement is more about taking a public stance against prejudice than any real market interest in the art. Fan baiting also permits studios to cultivate public skepticism over the legitimacy of poor reviews, right? So they're putting them over them. They're allowing your mind to take over poor reviews and say, no, it's because they're racist. Fan baiting also compels reviewers to temper their criticism for fear of becoming associated with the toxic fandom and losing their professional credibility, resulting in telling discrepancies between critic and audience review scores. The true nature of fan baiting is never so clear as when a script is well crafted and audience reviews are accordingly positive, exposing the announcements, declarations of solidarity, and grooming of skepticism for what they are really: cynical corporate marketing tactics. Put another way, media corporations have found a way to monetize the racism that they set up their actors to receive, right? So they're setting them up to receive racist abuse so that they can monetize it, right? This is some pretty dark, dark stuff. And if you look in this privileged moment persuasion formula, that's what we're seeing. We have bots, we have these announcements, that's the privileged moment. Congratulations to this person from wherever, and they're not white, so celebrate their casting. And then the focused illusion is those few people getting angry about it, right? And then we see the bad reviews come in, right? That's a 1 star. I don't know if my yellow comes through, but I have a 1 yellow, and it's like a 1 star review, right? So bad. So then you start understanding that the bad review was because of people being against diversity, right? And then survival, right? Make the money, make the show successful, get the money, do all these things, right? And then in the end, what you get is cognitive closure, right? You get cognitive closure, right? And the movie studio is doing great. They're not being threatened by racists. They're making good movies. Or, right, let's take this one step further. Balaji today talking about the New York Times. The New York Times, right? The New York Times. And in the context of everyone crying about Kanye West, who we're going to talk about in a second as well, right? People crying about Kanye West, these stories are related. So what turned out, Matthew Iglesias, right? Rotten Tomatoes used to be a review page that would provide better insights, Justin says, but now the review numbers on there are getting, yeah, totally. They're not even worth listening to, right? So Matthew Iglesias and a few folks were talking yesterday about the New York Times mandate from on high to criticize tech founders, the tech sector, what they're doing and whatnot. And here's what Balaji said. Let me just find the quote here. I lost my quote. Just 1 second. So yeah, it's all in the context of billionaires owning Twitter versus billionaires owning New York Times. And Balaji has a lot of quotes. I have too many of them here. But basically, I want to see the one that oh, here it is. Yeah, this is it. This is one he's reacting to, right? This is Matthew Iglesias and Kelsey Piper who's reacting. People might think that Matt is overstating this, but I literally heard it from the New York Times reporters at the time. There was a top-down decision that tech could not be covered positively, even when there was a true, newsworthy, and positive story. I'd never heard anything like it, right? So Balaji retweeting as well. Elon Musk has controlled Twitter for basically a day, and people are screaming oligarchy. The Ox-Sulzberger dynasty has controlled the New York Times, the most powerful news outlet in modern history, for 120 years. Where are the cries of oligarchy, of billionaire control of the media, right? So Balaji goes on and lists the mistakes, right? And he even compares the Salzberg family to Zuckerberg, right, at Facebook. And he says, why does everyone know Mark Zuckerberg, but almost no one knows A.G. Sulzberger? Somehow the guy who inherited the New York Times, who's surrounded by 1,000 journalists at all times, is the only one in modern world with any privacy. He doesn't get great coverage, he gets no coverage, right? Balaji says, Iglesias' thread has many aspects of truth. One thing to add is that the legacy media is actually simultaneously far to the left, far to the white, and far to the west of tech, right? So they're very white. They're very far away from what anyone in tech is even thinking, right? And so Balaji says, love or hate Zuck, he's been in the public for years. He's the son of a dentist, and he's out there taking the hits. But Sulzberger, the guy who inherited the New York Times from his father, and Sulzberger's my age, right? We're from the same era, right? The guy who inherited the New York Times from his father's father, he's invisible. Journo's scared to investigate him. So, and it goes on, right? It goes on about, what the New York Times, Balaji goes right into it. He says, they won the Pulitzer Prize for covering up genocide, the Holodomor of Ukrainians, right? They reported that Poland invaded Germany at the outset of World War II, right? They helped Castro take power with fawning coverage. They pushed Vietnam further into trouble at that time. And, there's that book by Ashley Rinsberg, When the Gray Lady Winked, right? About all the Gray Lady is the nickname for the New York Times, right? About all the terrible things they've done. And Balaji doesn't stop. He said, the organization calls itself the paper of record and runs billboards proclaiming itself the literal truth. and all other media corporations had an incentive to collude with them. So long as none defected, that oligarchy could undetectably fabricate stories. So Balaji not really sparing any punches against them. But what does it all mean, right? What does it all mean? Well, we know that they've been doing this, and they learned it from the New York Times, right? The New York Times has used its pages to provide these privileged moments for a long time, right? We're seeing it again. They're running a story today through the Associated Press, right, about election night. So now we're getting articles today, right, that there's so much going on. There's so many rules, voting procedures, attack vectors, and this is what the Associated Press says. Many races are won on election night, but it's not uncommon for it to take a few days for the Associated Press to declare some winners, as each state determines its own voting rules, laws, and procedures. True. That means counting doesn't happen all at once, right? So they're already getting into that. There are stories around the current whales buying gold, right? Where's all the gold going to, right? Now, remember, in the 1930s, when they confiscated gold, right, it was the U.S. foreign exchange, or what's it called? It's got a name. I can't remember. What is it again? I don't know if I put it in my notes. There's a name to this committee, right, that works with Treasury. It's the Exchange Control Board, ECB, yeah, something like that. The exchange control, they hold foreign reserves and can trade them when they need to, right, for liquidity purposes. And right now, they're already talking about how gold is being snatched up by China and Russia and who else knows, and we don't know. And this was the exact same stories they used in the prelude to the gold confiscation in the 1930s. Because, again, you had this worry that other countries were going to hoard the gold, right? And if we didn't hoard the gold, then they would beat us in the foreign exchange market and make us poor. So we also had to hoard the gold. And all of this happened the same way, right? It was, now I don't know if they were doing persuasion back in the 1930s in the New York Times, right? But today, when I start to hear these stories about mystery banks buying gold, could be true. I'm not saying it's not true, right? I'm not saying it's not true. But with all of the foreign exchange craziness around, right, that's about to happen, currently happening, we don't know, there's the opportunity for this to get much crazier, right? Much crazier. And so when we think of what this affords and what's going on here, what we see is, in the same as Hollywood and in the New York Times, right, it's the third party trap, right? You're having these transfers of knowledge, these hypnotic focusing of your attention, the entering of your brain to change causality, right? To basically persuade you to preload a conclusion into the brain, right? What Bitcoin actually manages to do is create this P2P format where it's the same third-party trap as banks and media and everything here, right? That stuff's all involves third parties, right? Like the bots. This is a diversity press release, right? But Bitcoin has always spread person to person, right? That's why the meetup culture. That's why the events. Art truly should be spread P2P. That was the only way it really works, right? When you get these movies that become hits out of nowhere, it's because of word of mouth, right? Word of mouth. Word of mouth is much more powerful than all of this persuasion, right? If your good friend says that was a great movie, and not, oh, I want to see that movie because all the outrage or whatever, right? If a person says, I laughed, I had a great time, you're more likely to see it. Books, 100% are sold word of mouth. You can't get a book to be popular unless other people say it's good and then recommend it to someone, and there's a virality to it, right? And what we're saying here is that all of this existed. This whole persuasion, this whole manipulative fan baiting only works when you have these non-trusted third parties entering the dialogue of taste, aesthetic, all these things. Critics, right? Critics, commentators, journalists. That's what allowed it. Just like banks required the institutions of, or the Federal Reserve and the money creators required the third-party institutions of banks in order to create this system that we have. Hollywood and the media machine required these writers and journalists and all that to create and churn out these stories. But Bitcoin flattens the field, right? In the same way that it flattens the field financially to P2P, we can see it flatten the field in the future for art back to P2P, where it's just fan recommendations and you know, sort of in a community. All right, team. Justin says, imagine being worried about seizure-resistant money and deciding to buy gold instead of Bitcoin. It's pretty pathetic. But luckily, we have a way out. That's why we love Satoshi, right? Satoshi not only solved the 50% attack and double spend and all those things, right? Not only did Satoshi solve those things, he might have made Hollywood great again. We got to thank Satoshi for that. Thank you, Satoshi. Weird Friday mornings. I have a call. I'm a minute late too. Peace, team. See you tomorrow.